Mic check 1, 2. There we go. Grand Rising, Grand Rising. Peace, peace, peace. Sorry for the small technical difficulties. Who's doing this rising? Ones in the chat just to make sure that the sound is coming through, that everyone can be heard. Can I get a mic check from the panel just to check everyone's levels real quick?
Mic check.
Check.
2 2 1 2.
Y'all got that harmony mic check, I see. Okay, sound and everything coming through clearly. Well, basically, we're continuing on the Buffalo Soldiers. Before we get into it, how was your night? No sellout of copy NDO? Everything all right?
Yep, everything good. Got a lot of rest.
Yeah, we had to deal with some complications in the newsroom, but looks like things are at least stable for now. They're not fixed, but they're stable. So it earned me a little bit of downtime.
All right. That's what's up. Well, today we're going to go over the 25th Infantry, part of the Buffalo Soldiers. Going to repost it up again. I posted it up in the beginning. I'm going to repost it again. All right, got that posted in the chat. And we can start. This is the 25th Infantry Regiment. It goes on to state the 25th United States Infantry Regiment was one of the racially segregated units of the United States Army, known as Buffalo Soldiers. The 25th served from 1866 to 1957, seeing action in the American Indian Wars, Spanish-American War, Philippine-American War, and World War II. It goes down to other units known as the 25th Infantry Regiment. There was a 25th Infantry Regiment raised in 1812 that served on the Lake Champlain Front and the Niagara Frontier in the War of 1812. 1815, during a post-war reduction in forces, it was consolidated with 4 other regiments to form the 6th Infantry Regiment. Beginning in January 1864, the 25th United States Colored Infantry was recruited and trained at Camp William Penn, Pennsylvania. This ran out of service on December 6, 1865. On the 28th of July, 1866, 18th Infantry, raised in 1861 for service in the American Civil War, was separated and designated the 25th Infantry Regiment. In 1869, it was consolidated back into the 18th. It states after the Civil War, it was expanded to 45 infantry regiments from its wartime strength of 19. The act of Congress that authorized this included the creation of 4 regiments of colored troops, racially segregated units with white officers and parentheses, African-American enlisted men. The Army had raised a number of volunteer United States colored troops, USCT. The new regiments were the 38th, the 40th, and the 41st Infantry Regiments, and they set about recruiting mostly from the USCT veterans. By an act of March 1869, Congress reduced the 45 regiments to 25, and the 4 colored regiments to 2, the 39th and the 40th. Regiments were consolidated and renumbered as the 25th Infantry Regiment. In April, the 25th established its first headquarters at Jackson Barracks, Louisiana, and Colonel Joseph A. Moore. Goes down to state in the Indian Wars. It says in May 1870, the regiment was ordered to San Antonio, Texas. After a short period, its companies were distributed across a number of small West Texas posts, including Forts Bliss, Clark, Davis, and Stockton. The 25th was posted along the Mexican border in Texas and New Mexico for the next 10 years, providing border security, building roads, telegraph lines, and on occasion participating in operations against Indian bands. 1878, a detachment entered Mexico on a punitive expedition. In the 1880s, the 25th was transferred to the Northern Great Plains, in Dakota Territory, Montana, and Minnesota. Elements of the 25th took part in the last major Indian campaign, the Pine Ridge Campaign of 1890 to 1891. It says several companies of the 25th were deployed to break the Northern Pacific Railroad strike of 1894. In 1896, Lieutenant James A. Moss, Corps of Bicycle Troops, to study the effect concept. I'll say this again. In 1896, Lieutenant James A. Moss formed the Bicycle Troops to study the effectiveness of the concept, especially in mountainous terrains of the Rockies. Moss made practical runs to Glacier and the Yellowstone National Park in the summer of 1896. In 1897, Moss, a surgeon, a reporter, and 20 enlisted men made a 41-day ride from Missoula, Montana, to St. Louis, Missouri. Bicycles in the late 1800s fighting. Goes on now to the Spanish-American War. All 4 colored regiments were transferred to Florida in the spring of 1898 for the war with Spain. They were assigned to Major General Shafter's V Corps, which moved to Cuba to capture the major eastern city, Cuba. The 25th participated in the first July 1898 assault on El Caney, Brigadier General H.W. Lawton. Men from the 25th were among the first to reach the summit. Private T.C. Butler of H Company was first into the blockhouse at the summit. The Spanish flag, an officer of the 12th Infantry ordered Butler to turn over the flag, and the 12th later claimed credit for the capture. Lieutenant Colonel A.S. Daggett, commanding the 25th, filed an official protest over the incident. On July 14th, when the Spanish surrendered the city, the 25th had advanced closer to Santiago than any other unit. Goes on now to the Philippine-American War. In 1898, the 25th returned from Cuba to post in the Southern Rockies. Late in the year, they shipped out to the Philippine Islands to participate in operations against the Philippine nationalist movement of Emilio. Oh, forgot this dude name already. Ain't that something? To the Philippine nationalist movement of Emilio Aguinaldo. They returned to the U.S. in 1902. Goes on the Brownsville Affair. In 1906, a company of the 25th was dishonorably discharged without a trial on grounds of having shot at whites in Brownville, Texas. In 1972, the accused were found to be innocent of the charges 1906 or was reversed. Next it says forest fires of 1910. In the summer of 1910, the newly created United States Forest Service fighting hundreds of fires across northern Idaho, western Montana, Washington. Drought conditions, high winds, high temperatures, and lightning had created hundreds of forest fires. Dispatched by the Army to assist in the firefighting effort, members of the Company G, 25th Infantry Regiment, stationed at Fort George Wright in Spokane, Washington, were sent to Avery, Idaho, arriving on the 17th of August, 1910. The soldiers worked on the fire threatening the town over the next 4 days. On the 21st of August, the forest fire, pushed by strong winds and joining other fires, forced the evacuation of Avery. And the soldiers of the 25th Infantry Regiment were instrumental in the safe evacuation of hundreds of town folks. By the time the fire ended a few days later, over 3 million acres had been burned. After the fire, the soldiers assisted with the cleanup and in the search and recovery of many that were killed during the fire. It says in the PBS documentary titled The Big Burn, historians credited the Buffalo Soldiers with saving the town of Avery by building a backfire that collided and then consumed the front fire until there were no fire. Their wit saved the town from other destruction. First firefighters we see out there in the forest. No sellout, you think you can pick up from World War One?
Oh yeah, just give me a minute to find my place.
No problem. Again, what didn't they do? Like basically, whatever there was something going wrong and they needed some extra help. Seemed to me they kept calling on the same group of people. Like doing that Grand Rising to the chat. Grand Rising, Enrique, LJ Free, Pamela Hall, David Corey. That's everyone. Original Tiller. That's all the ones I've seen came across. Copper Colored Queen, Grand Rising.
You said World War One?
Yeah.
Word. All right. During World War One, peace to the chat, the 25th was assigned to garrison duty at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii and did not see combat. Am I in the right section? Where am I at? Is that where you at, Bones?
That's right.
Yeah, okay.
Correct.
World War II. That was a short section on World War One. In World War II, the 25th Infantry Regiment, colored, was an organic element of the 93rd Infantry Division, colored, and served in the Pacific Theater of Operations. The regiment departed San Francisco on 24 January 1944 and arrived on the Guadalcanal in echelons between 7 February and 5 March 1944. From there, the regiment was transferred to Bougainville and attached to the Americal Division to take part in offensive operations against Japanese forces on that island in April and May of the same year. From 26 May to 21 June, the regiment was stationed on the Green Islands, where it received further training and was employed for the construction of defensive fortifications and installation. From 10 November 1944 to 30 March 1945, the 25th Infantry Regiment was involved as defense regiment around Finskafin, New Guinea. Finskafin, New Guinea looks like.
Finschhafen.
Finschhafen, okay. I'm sitting here trying to be fancy with the
See,
CH.
that's why you're here. So we'll stop messing up people names and towns.
Yep.
Appreciate that, Carl.
Thanks,
No
copper.
problem.
We've been butchering all week.
Now, why don't you break Finch and Fin? No, I'm just break it down for it. No. The regiment's final transfer during World War II was Morotai Island,
Yep.
where it arrived by 12 April 1945, where it once again participated in offensive operations until the end of the war. For World War II, the 25th Infantry Regiment, colored, received campaign credit for the Northern Solomons, Bismarck Archipelago, maybe, and New Guinea.
Yeah,
Is it Archie or Archie? I'm looking for this.
archipelago.
Archipelago. All right. Trying to be fancy. And New Guinea. The regiment was inactivated at Camp Stoneman, California on 3 February 1946 and relieved from assignment to the 93D, or it might be 93rd Infantry Division on 5 February 1946. Within a few years, the entire U.S. military was ordered desegregated by President Harry Truman, ending all segregation in the American Armed Forces. Post-World War II. Right after the 25th Infantry Regiment was inactivated in February 1946 at Camp Stoneman, California, it was brought back to life during the period February to May 1946 at Fort Benning, Georgia. But first, the 107th Regimental Combat Team, RCT, colored, is worth mentioning and is part of this story. First Army activated the 107th RCT at Fort Benning, Georgia on 21 February 1946. It was activated with all the required supporting forces as the 107th Infantry Regiment, the 571st Field Artillery Battalion, 105 millimeter howitzer truck drawn, 22nd Medium Tank Company, or 22D Medium Tank Company, 973D Engineer Combat Company, and the 375th Medical Collecting Company. The 107th had recently been assigned the 196th Army Ground Forces Band, colored, from Camp Shelby, Mississippi. The 107th RCT had an assigned strength of 139 officers, 7 warrant officers, 2,662 enlisted men. Officer personnel was white and colored, while enlisted personnel was all colored. The 107th RCT history would be short-lived. On March 21st, 1946, the 107th would be reflagged as the 25th Regimental Combat Team, colored, assigned to 4th Headquarters, 1st Army, and would inherit all the units of the 107th RCT minus the 107th Infantry Regiment. The first commander of the 25th RCT was Colonel later. One second. Mic check. Mic check.
Hear you loud and clear.
Okay. Let's see. Lost my place. Let's see. On March 21st, 1946, the 107th would be reflagged as the 25th Regimental Combat Team, colored, assigned to 4th Headquarters, 1st Army, and would inherit all the units of the 107th RCT minus the 107th Infantry Regiment. The first commander of the 25th RCT was Colonel, later Brigadier General Robert L. Dulaney, a veteran of World War II in Europe. On April 6th, the regiment was selected to march in the Army Day Parade down Constitution Avenue in Washington, D.C., representing all veterans from World War I and World War II. On April 18th, 1946, the entire 25th RCT moved to the Sand Hill area of Fort Benning. In May 1946, the 25th RCT activated its 3D Battalion, which had been unfilled since March 21st, 1946. With the new 3D Battalion, now part of the 25th RCT, Personnel would increase by 139 officers, 5 warrant officers, and 2,810 enlisted personnel for a 25th RCT total of approximately 4,000 soldiers. In early November 1946, the 25th RCT regimental colors were returned to the unit in a ceremony at the 25th RCT parade grounds at the Sand Hill area. Also, in November 1946, the 25th RCT established a new 2-year educational program geared towards enlisted soldiers lacking education below the 8th grade. As part of their training, the program was designed to raise to an 8th grade level to those students that fell into the educational subpar brackets of 4 and 5 on the Army General Classification Test. Some 1,900 25th RCT students began the program in early November 1946 at Fort Benning, Georgia. All right, moving on to the Cold War. Now that the 25th RCT had been brought up to full personnel strength, it would soon be supporting its old friend, the 24th Infantry Regiment, colored. The 24th was now on occupation duty in the Far East. The Army was going to try an experiment of integrating the entire 24th Infantry Regiment, colored, into the white 25th Infantry Division, also on occupation duty in Japan. This would leave the 27th and the 35th Infantry Regiments in the division. The 4th Infantry Regiment was pulled out of the division and returned to the States. To bring the 24th Infantry Regiment up to full strength, the War Department approved transferring soldiers from the 25th Infantry Regiment to the 24th Infantry Regiment on very short notice. Over 20 officers and 515 soldiers from the 25th Infantry Regiment at Fort Benning were intensively trained for this assignment. This contingent of soldiers left Fort Benning, Georgia on 5 February 1947 under the command of Captain Raymond A. Diggs on their first leg of a long-distance journey by ship to Japan. These soldiers arrived in Japan in late February 1947. In a ceremony at the Sand Hills Parade Grounds early in March 1947, the 25th Infantry Regiment received its 3 World War II Asiatic Pacific campaign streamers for the New Guinea, Northern Solomons, and Bismarck Archipelago. Archipelago, man. I like that word better. Archipelago. I'm like, archipelago. What am I doing? Archipelago. In a major reorganization of the 25th RCT, the Regimental Combat Team organization was no more on February 15, 1947. The 25th Infantry Regiment organization would remain along with the same supporting units with the addition of the 999th Field Artillery Battalion. The number of 25th Infantry Rifle Battalions would drop from 3 to 2. 1st Battalion was designated to furnish personnel for the Air Indoctrination Course that was to be conducted at Lawson Field, Fort Benning. The 2nd Battalion was attached to the 325th Airborne Infantry Regiment and acting as demonstration troops for the infantry school at Fort Benning and working problems for students. The 25th would celebrate its 78th anniversary the week of May 4th, 1947, during Organization Day at Fort Benning. It had been recognized on April 20th, 1869 by an act of Congress. The 25th Infantry Regiment had fought in 4 wars in its 78-year history. The regiment had participated in the Indian Wars, the War with Spain, the Philippine Insurrection, and World War II. In July 1947, the 25th Infantry Regiment would lose one of its units, the 571st Field Artillery Battalion. It was being transferred to Fort Riley, Kansas, to the Army's Field Artillery Center, where it would serve as the quote-unquote school troops unit for artillery service, for artillery officer candidate classes at Riley. The 571st performed similar functions while assigned to Fort Benning. And then the wars.
So notice they didn't lose them to battle. They lost them basically to reassignment.
Yep.
Being broken up and moved around. But before we go further, it's just amazing to me how they they keep trying to push the narrative as African American slaves, but these men enlisted into the army. So, what slave plantation did they track back to? Where's that information?
That's a good question.
And how if these are descendants of slaves that didn't have no education, supposedly didn't know the land, foreigners to the land, how were they tracking down Indians? How were they mapping out the forest? And next, if they were ex-slaves, why when you sending them abroad to all these foreign countries and back?
Where Africa at? I just
Right.
want to know. I'm just curious. Which way? Could you point to it? Okay. No, okay.
I mean, they push the narrative that we were beat on, kicked on, spit on, and all this during these times. They turn around, give you weapons. Not only give you weapons, you turn around and end up training everybody else how to be more efficient with these weapons and horses. Think about over the last couple of days, we come to realize that the Buffalo Soldiers, they had aircraft. They were the ones with the Apache helicopters. Find out a lot of the force split up and became the Tuskegee Airmen. Just don't want to tell you. They can make a movie.
You ain't lying. Even if it don't make it to theaters, like, let's put this one out. Let's do a TV movie at least.
Yeah, I had a great uncle that served in World War II. He was in the European theater, and he was in Luxembourg when he was stationed in Luxembourg, and he would watch every war documentary, every war made for TV movie. He would watch all of them, and he would break all of them down and say, "Well, this was accurate. That won't accurate. They ain't do that." So. They put a lot of this stuff out, and they were limited in scope and how they explained stuff, especially when they were covering, so-called Negro troops. They would be really delicate in how they would handle that because they never wanted to talk about too much with these battalions and these troops. They didn't really want to explain much. They wanted to show you the war. They wanted to show you the killing and the fighting, but not so much exactly what was going on outside of that.
This question might be a little bit on the petty side, but anybody can answer it. If these people were African Americans, so they try to say, why all the paperwork, all the newspaper clippings say colored?
Wow. Yeah, I didn't think about that.
Why would they consider the colored army or the colored infantry?
Yeah, they got colored right behind each one of these names. Each one of the group names.
Yeah.
Colored.
Why wouldn't it just be the African or the African American?
Give us a double A.
It's way before AAA.
Oh.
I don't know, just like I said, some more random thoughts as we read through these stories.
Free tail. Oh, yeah, I forgot about that. They had first helicopters and tanks. They were definitely, yeah. I'm trying to figure out, like, why? Yeah, you give somebody some big guns. Like, here you go.
Remember history tell you they were illiterate, they didn't have supplies. They were getting $13 a month, room and board and food.
Exactly.
But they said they went up to New York. They went up to New York. They was living in luxury.
Had people hating.
He installed for horses when most people didn't have heat for themselves.
Yeah, that's a fact.
Moving on. Next, to say what campaigns, Indian wars, 1869 to 1890, the Spanish American War, the Philippine American War, and World War II. Then it goes down to notable soldiers and officers. Prince Romerson, 1840
Romerson, yep.
to 1872. It states a native Hawaiian soldier from the Kingdom of Hawaii who also fought in the Civil War.
So the Kingdom of Hawaii was
Wait,
around.
hold up. No, I had to post the
Yeah.
breaks. It's the 25th, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yes,
And
it
the
is.
25th is right.
Color.
Man.
Okay, so I'm going to read this
Yep.
again. Prince Romerson, 1840 to 1872, Hawaiian soldier from the Kingdom of Hawaii who also fought in the Civil War. Okay, Carol Augustine DeVoe, 1859 to 1930, quartermaster. Says Louis Broadus, 1897 to 1917. Gilbert W. Lindsay, 1900 to 1990, Los Angeles City Council member from 1963 to 90. What's up?
Mm-hmm.
James Ray was his Beauregard,
Beauregard.
1972 to 1994. Then it goes on to say Clarence Tinker from 1887 to 1942. And those some of the notable ones.
The 25th.
Yeah, digging a little deeper into Prince Romerson, I think this should probably be noted as well. And if you click the link on his name, it takes you to this article here. Born 1840 to 1930. Oh, I'm sorry, March 30th, 1872. Was a Union Army soldier of Native Hawaiian descent in a colored regiment. Now, like we were saying, one of the Hawaii sons of the Civil War. When have we heard about this aspect of the Civil War? Remember, we were always told, right? We were always told the Civil War was between the North and the South. We were always told that the West stayed out of it. So, how much further west can you get in America, the United States, than Hawaii, which wasn't even a state at that point? So this was a territory. Yet you're seeing people from this territory, native people, being put into colored regiments, or people that were considered colored, right? Negro or mulatto. They were put into these regiments and they fought these wars of the United States, of the Union. Let that sink in for a minute. He was among a group of more than 100 documented Native Hawaiian and Hawaii-born combatants who fought in the American Civil War while the Kingdom of Hawaii was still an independent nation.
Not the island, the kingdom.
Kingdom.
And this is 1872.
And look what, if you go a little bit further down, look where he's buried. San Antonio National Cemetery. Where's San Antonio? It's in Tejas. Right? And he fought for the Union Navy, Union Army, and the United States Army later on. Years of service between 1863 and 1872, and he was a sergeant. Now, people think that these Native and colored people, supposedly, were just infantrymen, right? That they were just enlisted infantrymen that they threw on the front lines and they died. This man became a sergeant. I have in my family, and I'm sure many of you have in your families, great men who enlisted in America's wars, and not only went from being enlisted, but made it to the rank of sergeant. My great uncle that I referred to earlier was a master sergeant. at the end of World War II. He went to Japan in during the Korean conflict. And he got out of the Army, the U.S. Army, as a master sergeant. These were not grunts. These were not men who were disposable, like we often get told in a lot of these narratives about war. These were great men who fought these wars, who were proud and accomplished men.
Big facts.
Y'all mind? I don't want to take up too much time. Y'all mind if I read a little bit more of this brother here?
No, go ahead. Yeah, that's what we do. Let's get it.
All
Hard
right.
hats and schools. Make sure them double strap seatbelts in. We digging. Let's get it.
All right. I think I'm a little overdue on some of the narration here as well, so I'm gonna go ahead and catch up. Let's see here. Living in the American Northeast before the war, Robinson enlisted in the Union Navy in 1863 as part of the blockading squadrons responsible for maintaining the blockade of the ports of the Confederacy. After being discharged from national service, he re-enlisted in the Union Army under the 5th Regiment, Massachusetts Colored Volunteer Cavalry, a United States Colored USCC Regiment, and was promoted to the rank of sergeant on June 1st, 1864. So while we're all told that people who were considered colored were all slaves, who were all, if they fought in these wars, they were infantrymen, they were grunts, they were nobodies, they were expendable. Not to diminish the role of infantrymen, because it is legitimate, but their role gets downplayed. This man became a sergeant on June 1st, 1864. Robinson fought with the 5th USCC until the end of the war. Illness prevented him from continuing with his regiment's reassignment to Clarksville, Texas, and he was mustered out in 1865. After the war, like many former USCT veterans, he remained in the Army on the frontier as part of the Buffalo Soldiers. Now, Hawaiian-born Buffalo Soldier, until he died in 1872. Robinson's military career shows the diverse attitudes of officers to the Native Hawaiians and people of color. Notice they say and people of color who served on segregated units during and shortly after the Civil War. In 2010, the Hawaii Sons of the Civil War were commemorated with a bronze plaque erected along the pathway, at the National Memorial Cemetery of the Pacific in Honolulu. When have we heard about this? When did the news cover this?
Today, like 5 minutes ago.
Exactly. It's the stuff you don't see on the mainstream media. They'll talk about the people that served, in the Pacific and in the European theaters of the war, but they never touch on these folks. They always go off of the major campaigns, Battle of Midway, D-Day, but they never talk about some of these peripheral wars that were going on in other parts of the world with soldiers that were native tribes people that came from these kingdoms and these tribes. These are the people who, when we talk about honoring our troops and veterans, these are people that get forgotten. And we need to understand that.
Well, you going through the context, or?
Hang on one second. Let me pull the page back up here.
No.
Y'all can go through the context here. After the outbreak of the American Civil War, King Kamehameha the Fourth declared the Kingdom of Hawaii's neutrality on August 26, 1861. Despite the stance of neutrality, many Native Hawaiians and Hawaii-born Americans, mainly descendants of American missionaries abroad and in the islands, acted independently and enlisted in the military regiments various states in the Union and the Confederacy. Native Hawaiian participation in American wars was not unheard of. Native Hawaiians had served in the United States Navy and Army since the War of 1812. Look how far back this is going. And even more fought during the American Civil War. There were many varying reasons for joining the war. Hawaiians abroad often sought economic gains and adventures through their enlistment. These include the unemployed sailors on whaling ships who joined the Union Navy and sailors on whaling ships captured by the Confederate Navy who served on the CSS Shenandoah. There was also an ideological sympathy for the cause of the war. Many Hawaiians sympathized with the Union because of Hawaii's ties to New England through missionaries and the whaling industry, and the opposition of many people in the islands to slavery. So let that sink in as well. Because many of these people were far enough away to not be affected by it directly, but saw what was going on and what was coming. I can go a little bit further if you like.
Oh, yes. Continue, please.
All right. Prince Robinson was born around 1840, but little is known about his life before the war. There's no indication that his first name denotes any royal status, and his surname was often listed as Robinson. Different versions of his enlistment records noted his birthplace as Oahe, Sandwich Island, the island of Hawaii, or India. Interesting. There is also disagreement over his ethnicity. Some Filipino historians have claimed him as one of their own. Note, put a pin in Filipino. And he is included in lists of Filipino-American Civil War combatants.
Well, before you go further, know who the Filipinos were from yesterday when we did the 24th and writing letters back to the U.S., where the one dude said he railed in the glory of opening fire on black skin. So we already know, you know what I'm saying, the description of the Filipino before they moved them out to the island of Guam and started moving the Japanese in.
Yep.
Just a recap from yesterday. Now back to the day.
Yep.
All right. Let's see here. Robinson worked as a barber before his enlistment in 1863. It is thought that he came to the United States as a sailor aboard a merchant or whaling ship in the Pacific. Hawaiian sailors were highly regarded in the 18th and 19th century maritime industry and sought out as crew members. Regardless, it is known that Robinson was living in New York prior to joining the Navy. Probably helped by his experience at sea, he enlisted on January 22nd, 1863, as a landsman in the Union Navy. He served on the USS Wamsuta and the USS Mercedita as part of the blockading squadrons responsible for maintaining the blockade of the ports of the Confederate States. After serving in the Navy for a year, Robinson joined as a private in Company M of the 5th Regiment, Massachusetts Colored Volunteer Cavalry, led by Lieutenant Cornelius Kaler. Company M was the last to be mustered in May 5th, 1865. Like most Native Hawaiians who participated in the war, Robinson was assigned to the colored regiments probably because of his dark skin and the military segregation policy. So check the hijack now.
One more time, please. What was that again? Right. One more time.
Like most Native Hawaiians who participated in the war, Robinson was assigned to the colored regiments probably because of his dark skin color and the military segregation policy. So when we refer to people as a redaction and an amalgamation, look at how many different kinds of people had the designation of colored at this point. And we're going a little further. Robinson is one of the few Hawaiian soldiers of the Civil War whose real name is known. Many combatants served under anglicized pseudonyms. This is another thing that we need to take note of as well. Many of our people who, as we do our genealogy, we go back and we see people who've enlisted in various wars at home and abroad, went under anglicized synonyms. And as these men who were known under these anglicized synonyms, pseudonyms, I'm sorry, not synonyms, pseudonyms, or nom de guerre, right? Fighting names. As they had children, they retained those nom de guerre. They retained those anglicized wartime names because they were easier for English-speaking Americans to pronounce than Hawaiian names or Indian names. Think about that. They were often registered as Kansas. As Kanakas. I can't read today. As Kanakas, the 19th century term for Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, with the Sandwich Islands, i.e. Hawaii, noted as their place of origin, serving in the same regiment as other Hawaiian soldiers named Charles Heatley. And here's a card number here. It looks like a registration card number here. Enlistment card for Prince Romerson. Historian Ruth Ann Lumakun noted the military records of the Hawaiian-born Prince Romerson reveal both his service to U.S. and the diverse attitudes of officers toward people of color. Romerson was quickly promoted to sergeant on June 1st, 1864, possibly because he was literate. Another thing they want everybody to think is that all our people were illiterate during this time. That's not true. Romerson fought with his regiment at the Second Battle of Petersburg and took part in the Richmond-Petersburg campaign, better known as the Siege of Petersburg. He also served as guard for the Union prison camp for Confederates at Camp Lookout, Maryland, between the Union victory at Appomattox and the 5th Regiment's reassignment to Clarksville, Texas. Romerson fell ill and was sent to the Corps d'Afrique U.S. General Hospital in New Orleans on July 8th, 1865. Never recovering sufficiently to rejoin his regiment, he was transferred to DeCamp USA General Hospital, Davis Island, New York, before being mustered out on October 9th, 1865. In the post-war period, Romerson sought to rejoin the military, and in 1867, he enlisted in the 39th United States Infantry Regiment at the reduced rank of private. The 39th later consolidated with the 40th to create the 25th United States Infantry Regiment, a racially segregated unit of the United States Army. Its personnel were dubbed, quote, Buffalo Soldiers, and included many Civil War veterans from colored regiments such as the 5th USCC. Romerson served in the 25th for a full 3-year term, fighting in the American Indian Wars along the Texas frontier. He died on March 30th, 1872, possibly at Fort Griffin, where he was initially buried. On May 11th, 1872, he was reinterred at the San Antonio National Cemetery. Not sure if y'all wanted me to keep going or if we were going to switch gears at this point.
No, you can keep going into them.
All right.
It's a whole bunch of Jews in this story.
Oh, absolutely. So looking at his legacy, Prince Romerson's service in the war illustrated one of the many examples of Hawaiian recruits assigned to segregated regiments and a diverse attitude towards them. McCune noted, indisputable is his commitment to honorable service. After the war, the military service of Hawaiians, including Prince Romerson and many others, was largely forgotten disappearing from the collective memories of the American Civil War and the history of Hawaii. In recent years, Hawaiian residents, historians, and descendants of Hawaiian combatants in the conflict have insisted on the need to remember our boys from Hawaii. Renewed interest in the stories of these individuals and this particular period of Hawaiian American history has inspired efforts to preserve the memories of the Hawaiians who served in the war. On August 26, 2010, on the anniversary of the signing of the Hawaiian Neutrality Proclamation, the bronze plaque was erected along the memorial pathway, as mentioned earlier, at the National Memorial Cemetery in Honolulu, recognizing these Hawaii sons of the Civil War. The more than 100 documented Hawaiians who served during the American Civil War for both the Union and the Confederacy. As of 2014, researchers have identified 119 documented Native Hawaiian and Hawaii-born combatants from historical records. The exact number still remains unclear because many Hawaiians enlisted and served under anglicized pseudonyms, and little is known about them due to the lack of detailed records. In 2015, the sesquicentennial of the end of the American Civil War, the National Park Service released a publication entitled Asians and Pacific Islanders in the Civil War, concerning the service of the large number of combatants of Asian and Pacific Islander descent who fought during the war. The history of Hawaii's involvement and the biographies of Romerson and others were written by historians Luthan Lum-Makun, Anita Manning, and Justin Vance.
All I can say, Copper, that was a deep one.
That was. I'm reading this and my mind is being blown as I'm going through it.
So now you know that the Filipinos look just like us. Now you know the Hawaiians look just like us. Hold time out. Stop the presses. They do all this memorial stuff. They love the military so much, but you don't never hear these stories.
Ever. Again, they always go to the what are considered to be significant or tide turning battles, and different parts of the war, but they tend to conveniently leave out the colored soldiers that were in Luxembourg, the colored soldiers that liberated Dachau. Most people don't know that there were colored soldiers there. My great uncle was one of them. When you see movies like The Miracle at St. Anna,
yeah,
how surprising was that for most people to see that there were colored troops in Italy, many of which would be considered to be Native Americans if we go back in their history.
Yep, Buffalo Soldiers.
Buffalo Soldiers. These people were all over the world fighting for the United States. And I know a lot of people tend to throw shade on America and the flag and a lot of things that we see as being quote unquote white or of colonizers and all of this kind of stuff. But we got to remember, while our history is very sordid in that aspect, you also have a lot of our people that have fought and died for this same flag. We look at July 4th as something for somebody else, but our people participated in this, our grandfathers, great-grandfathers, and even further back. So that's why one of the things that we've been talking about, especially when it comes to race and when it comes to, colonization and, ties to governments and so forth, we have to understand we were the cowboys and the Indians. We were both. We were the Indians being removed, and we were the Buffalo Soldiers. We are tied to both parts of this history, to all of this history, especially when it comes to warfare.
Yep. You hit it right on the head that we're tied into both sides. Indians were capturing Indians, selling Indians, selling Indian land.
That's exactly right. Because they keep talking about how the Indians disappeared. Well, who was needed? You know, they talk about how the Indians were disappeared and how they were conquered and so forth. Who was the people that conquered them? They want to make you think that there was, you know, a lot of these other folks that rode in on horses and just kind of cleaned things up. But no, it wasn't that easy. And not only was it not that easy, they needed none other than other Indians who had been acculturated and changed and reclassified to do it. They needed these same descendants of Indians to go around the world doing the same thing. And that's why it's important that we understand that both sides of history that our people are on. We can't throw this away. We can't forget that it happened. We have to understand it, and we have to understand why and how it was able to happen. We had to understand that Cherokee troops that were all able to speak to each other in Cherokee and baffle German code breakers.
Yep.
Okay. We have to understand all of this. We have to understand why we're used. We have to understand why they name so many military weapons and vehicles after indigenous peoples. The Pequots, the Apache. Okay, they have to name these after so many of our ancestors because they utilize our ancestors to get the job done. These were the fiercest.
They war call signs. You just read
Right.
where they got that from. Your ancestors.
That's right.
So now you see when you hear Indians, it's their name such and such. Chewhawk or something. You get what I'm saying? Now you know what it means now.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
It was just another way of describing a person. Because it was easier for the foreigners to remember that than to say your actual name.
Exactly. Not everybody was given their name on the plantation because they took the name of somebody else that owned them. That's not everybody's story. And you'll find it's a lot fewer of us than we've been told. And so when you see people walking around and talking about their American descendants of slaves just because of how they look, that isn't necessarily so. They need to go back and they need to understand where they came from and who they really are. That's why we're here. That's what this is about.
Facts.
Can't say it no better. I mean, trying to judge who you are off the eye test, you're going to fail every time. And like we said, this all ties back to genealogy. It all ties back to doing the study of oneself and these bits and pieces of history that we dig up and we bring to the forefront on a lot of your ancestors from these time periods. Where were you saying on census records, then for 10 years, you don't see them again and they pop back up again. And all this is happening during the time when there's wars going on. Okay, now I have a better understanding of the time period. And still, I need somebody to answer for me. Anybody. Somebody treated all your people like slaves, supposedly beat down on them, treated them like dirt. They turn around and give you a gun and you go fight for them. How? Anybody, please help me with this one.
Help me, please. Help me.
And that's how I'm looking at it. Somebody done jumped all over you, jumped over your mother, jumped over your grandmother, aunties, killed your people, turn around and give you a weapon. I don't know, sound like too much of a script.
Exactly. Look, you said script, and I was about to say, anybody seen Django at the beginning?
Because I'm like,
I think that'll be the reaction of many. You hand somebody a gun after.
And if these were so much of your property, why are they volunteering and signing up for the military? Why are they collecting a paycheck?
Yeah, it should be voluntold, not volunteer.
You know what I'm saying? When you just be like, okay, this is my property, y'all finna go fight. It seemed like people were doing that anyway off of command.
How high, boss?
I don't know. To me, it's just some common things that just don't line up in the makeup of human beings. You can't do that now. And still, I would like to know how 5% of so-called Africans that made it to British North America turned the whole population of melanated people here into Africans.
Well, I think that it's just as misguided as thinking that somebody can sail from Sierra Leone or Nigeria straight across the Atlantic to get to the Caribbean. Most modern ships don't sail that route, and that's with modern technology. People got to understand how technology works and how travel works. Because a lot of people never travel, so they don't understand why you got to take certain flights to get certain places around the world. They don't understand why you have to go and hug the shoreline to get to certain places or to get across oceans. They don't understand that.
Mess around and get lost.
Sorry, I had to mute real quick.
No problem. And not only the other thing that it's digging out, it's showing the stories that you have been heard, that the indigenous people were melanated. Yesterday we read, and we know to be true because there's a court martial for it, that the general had all letters forcefully retracted of any soldier that was telling them what was going on in the Philippines. And these are eyewitness accounts from the soldiers that's over there fighting. And how else could the Buffalo Soldiers blend in to infiltrate them for them to catch the dude? That means all these people look alike. Because how you gonna infiltrate me and you like 8 shades lighter? I'm just saying.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, when you hear all these tales, antebellum and Civil War era tales about how you have all these runaway slaves that blend into the local tribes and they can't be found. How is that? If these people are so stark in different kinds of appearance, doesn't make any sense. These were the same people. Yeah, they may have had one group whose hair was cut, who were wearing different clothes and speaking different languages, but these were the same people. And that's where so much of what our understanding of race gets caught up. It gets caught up in empirical, looking at the empirical aspects of people. Well, such and such is short hair. The slave or the Negro has short hair. The Indian has long hair. Well, what does it take to change that? A haircut, right? I mean, I went to a powwow
Mm.
earlier this year, and the people there look like any other location that you go around the country. You go to a mall or you go to a store or something, and you see that diverse of group of people at the powwow. People darker than I am, people that could pass for white. A lot of these people, and there's been a mix, and we all know that was going on, right? But at the same time, we have to understand that looking at somebody empirically and looking at their quote unquote race based on that is at best misguided.
Especially when we know this thing called race is man-made. It's nothing but a class system when you say race. It's just a major class system.
That's right.
Because a lot of these terms that we use in this country to identify the rest of the world, like Copper Indio said, when you get the chance to travel, you'll realize these people don't identify themselves under them names. Because
That's right.
we done mentioned it before. You'll say French, German, Dutch, Chinese, Japanese, Arab. But guess what? They all identified as Europeans.
That's right. And looking at the topic of the day, I found I talked to some of the folks in back chat about this a while back, but I found a draft card for my grandmother's Uncle Lester, and he was considered by by our family to be an Indian man, and his draft card said that his race was Negro, but that somehow his skin. Well, no, I'm sorry. They said his eye color was dark blue, and that his hair color was light brown. So almost like a sandy blonde. So how do you get that from what's classified on that card as a Negro that the people in this neighborhood consider to be an Indian? Right. So, and he was classified as a Negro on that registration card because he told them he was, not because they assumed that he was. Because again, they got his eye color is blue, and his hair color is light brown. I mean, this is a guy that essentially, based on that description, could look like Captain America. Yet he's on there as a Negro, and the people in his community and his family consider him Indian. What do you do with that?
Mm-hmm. And if you study it, you see in time they created more racial classes.
Right.
And I'm going to call it exactly what it is, racial classes. It does not exist.
We had to build on race, and not to go too far into this, but we had to build on race a while back, and we were talking about how I think when we all gave our our perspective on what race was in the beginning of the build, and one of the things that I said about it was that it was a construct, and it is, because I have a sister that's shades lighter than I am, but our fathers are different. Her father's actually darker than I am. Our mother is my complexion, yet she's somehow shades lighter than I am. And it's not just her. There's multiple people in my family. My grandmother, the same complexion she is. Right? I mean, we know in genetics and in heredity that those kinds of traits can skip generations. So why is it that far-fetched to think that people that may look a little different. Remember, when you talk about copper colored people, if you get a bag of pennies and you spread them out, or if you go in your pocket and pull out a handful of pennies and spread them out, they're all different shades of brown, reddish brown, right? So, you know, if you can take a certain group that looks a certain shade of reddish brown and say, well, y'all are lighter than these other folks over here, so y'all are a different race of people. Even though everybody's speaking the same language, y'all are a different race of people. This is how, this is how we've handled race. I saw a thing we had to get into this in a later show, but I was looking at how there was a school that separated people based on a hair test. On a hair
test.
Hair comb test. If you could get your a comb easily through your hair, you were separated from all the kids with coarse hair, even though you were related, even though you were siblings or cousins. So this is how people were separated. When you start seeing things like this, is it really that far-fetched to see how you have some people that show up and they're related to these other people that look nothing like them after 3-4 generations have passed and they're all classified as different people? This is why when you look on the census and you see the designation for race, why do they have it so granular, especially when they're talking about Native Americans? Why is the group of Native Americans split into Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, Eskimos, Alaskan Natives, stuff like that? Why are these groups split into so many groups when they're all supposed to be, supposed to have a common ancestry? They're all people of the Americas, all people of the same landmass. They don't separate the peoples of Europe like that. They just call them white. Doesn't matter if you're from Turkey. Doesn't matter if you're from England. You're considered white. Yet somehow these people from this other landmass here had to be separated, divided. So not to take the show on a tangent or nothing, but I thought that was needed with what we saw. So.
Yeah, no, anytime you can get the opportunity to drop the knowledge and info that you have, we appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate it as well, and you're gonna find there's a lot of stories like this, especially, and that's what's been so engaging about talking about Buffalo Soldiers, because it's a thing that comes up. We hear it in songs. We hear, we hear it in reggae songs. We hear it in folk songs, right? It comes up every so often, but they never talk about who those people were and what they actually did. And once you start getting into it, like we've been talking about, what didn't they do? What weren't they able to accomplish? And you see how they revered these people. And you also see how much, not only did they need us, but how valuable we are to our way of life.
Facts.
They may spit in your face. They may deny you a loan, right? They may keep you from getting where you need to be on certain things, but this place would not exist as it does without us.
That's why they remove you from the system. They don't have to physically remove you from the land if they can program you over time to hate yourself so much that you don't even participate in the system that your ancestors created.
Exactly. And you can be talked into helping them with everything. And by them, I'm not just talking about the people that, that are here, that run the government or whatever. I'm talking about the world. You'll get behind causes of the rest of the world and neglect your own. That's what this is about. The people here feeding the world the people here protecting the world, the people here giving the world its culture. Think about how much the world's culture comes from here. I was in India not long ago, a couple weeks ago, and while much of India still keeps its heritage, its culture, its own innate culture, it's a quickly changing nation. It's developing, not just from a standpoint of developing infrastructure, but their culture is changing. It's subtle, but it is beginning to change. And its change, it is beginning to become more like America. And what drives the culture of America? Us. I mean, to the point where I went and some colleagues that I was going to train gave me a handshake like they was bros. Because they studied that. They saw that on TV. And they attributed that to me. With the group that I went with, when we went to the office we were supposed to be in the site for our site visit, the people there recognized me. They didn't recognize other people I was with, they recognized me. We're what the world sees. We have to understand this. Many of us don't get outside of the country, but when you do, pay attention. Pay attention to what the world understands about America, whether they love us or hate us. Pay attention to what aspects of our culture they're taking in. Pay attention to this, because you're going to look in those places, you're going to start seeing yourself, especially when you're dealing with other indigenous people, like the people of India and the peoples of Africa. Not that we're connected to them necessarily, but you start seeing aspects of things that match what we've been studying about ourselves. Some of it's very ancient, and some of it is modern. Some of it is the culture that America is spreading around the world. We're not just feeding the world, we're enculturating the world.
And neglecting ourselves in the process.
Precisely. They talk about, like Lady Free said, when they talk about the Nagas in India, when you look at that Buddha statue, where the place I went is Hyderabad. And in Hyderabad, there's a huge lake. And in the middle of that lake is I want to say an 80-foot tall or so. I might be off in the size, but it's huge. 80-foot tall standing Buddha statue. And I took a speedboat out to see this statue. And when you look at that Buddha statue in India, you look at the Buddha statues in Laos and Cambodia, you look at the Buddha statues in China and Japan, the hair on top of those Buddhas don't look like the people that worship that Buddha. It's coiled. Looks a lot more like Aboriginal hair. Who were these people? Who was the Buddha? Who were the people that were the original monks in India? Why is it that you have Sikh, S-I-K-H, Sikh peoples, mostly the men who don't cut their, they don't shave or cut their hair, they have dreadlocks. A whole lot of people that you see with turbans in the East that are hiding dreadlocks under those turbans. The same kinds of dreadlocks that you saw in the Americas. Why are you seeing this? So when our fighting men go around the world and they see this stuff around the world, they were seeing the same thing I'm telling you right now. They were seeing themselves. Whether they were in Hawaii or whether they were in Guam, the Philippines, Cambodia, Indonesia, Sri Lanka, Bangalore, Delhi, they were seeing themselves halfway around the world. Lady Free says they found a Buddha statue in the Grand Canyon. Oh, they found a lot of stuff in the Grand Canyon. That's why you can't go to but certain parts of it. And they'll say it's because it's dangerous and you get lost. There's people that have gotten lost in the Grand Canyon, to be sure. But there's a lot you're not supposed to see there. And I think that we had a discussion before about national parks, and you're not supposed to see stuff. Not supposed to see stuff in the national parks either, because that's a problem. Because that begins to refute a lot of what we've understood about our history. Because we get this sanitized, simplified version of history, like we see in our with our fighting men in our wars. But we were never told any of this stuff. We never told where these statues come from, where these icons come from. James and I were talking about some stuff you see in Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. Like, how, I don't know how many of y'all have seen that movie, but there's a cult called the Thuggee cult, or the Thug cult, that is sacrificing people. They don't actually do that in India, but in the movie, they were sacrificing people to Kali. Kali is the consort of Shiva, right? Shiva is the destroyer. Okay. And so, but Kali does this dance, and she destroys everything in her path. And the only way to stop her is Shiva has to lay down. He has to pretend as if she's slain him or taken him down. And her love for him is what stops her. Now, James is much more educated and learned when it comes to the names and the structure of the religions here and the myth stories here in the Americas. But the same story exists here. How many people know that? How many people know that there was an equal to Kali and Shiva here in the Americas?
I know I didn't.
And you see that caduceus, and you see that helix that goes up into the wings of the top of the caduceus that you see like on ambulances and so forth. You're looking at a dual coiled snake. Those two snakes represent two gods. I'm not gonna get too much into that now, but those coiled snakes you see in Kemet, you see all the way in Egypt, with the wings at the top of it, and the Wajet, the sun disk, that has its wings spread out, and the two coiled snakes go up to the top of it. That's what our caduceus looks like, or the symbol for Hermes or Jehuti. You're seeing us around the world, and anybody who's ever led adventures around the world, anybody who's gone and fought around the world, as I said, they go on. Our fighting men go out to sea, and they begin seeing themselves. They begin seeing the American, not just in modern culture, but in ancient culture around the world. We have always fed the world. We fed the Romans. We gave the Romans culture. Their religious system based on the Greeks, who's based off of who? The Ethiopians and the other people that they're related to, that came from where the sun sets in the west, the Atlanteans. This is where we came from. This is who we were. This is why when they came here, they thought they had found the origin. They don't tell people that. But ask somebody who's in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and see what they tell you.
Let's go.
Right. Let's get it. Any of these people that know what they were looking at, the Jesuit priests that we were talking about, I want to say like a week or so ago, those people were writing notes and they were paying attention to the things that they saw. There's a reason why after the Americas was being colonized and explored, that you began to see the artwork in Europe change. the Bacchus statue of Michelangelo, all these depictions of the Christ with the Sacred Heart that you see in Mexico. Why do you see that in Mexico? The Sacred Heart, the heart that's on fire, that's in fuego with knives in it. Where did that symbolism come from? Is that a Christian thing that started in Europe and was colonized here? We got to understand what colonization really is. How much of colonization was actually here?
Mm-hmm.
So what exactly was colonized and what already existed?
Look at it this way. It's a lot easier to reprogram you with your own belief system than it is to force a new one on you.
That's right. We got to start asking some questions when we see our guys, our sons, our husbands, right? Our cousins, our fathers go to war and go around the world. We have to start asking questions now. What are they seeing? Where are they going?
Mm-hmm. Why at a particular point in time, and even to this day, it's cool for everybody else to grow their hair. But it's always been a problem for us when we grow our hair. We're raised being taught, keep our hair cut. Don't let our hair grow. I wonder why that is. The more and more it grows, you start realizing, you start looking like a lot of these symbolisms and images from these times.
That's right. Look at it, even in recent times. Look at how once the civil rights period got underway, how the visible culture of the people changed. How in the mid to late 60s and early 70s, people started growing their hair out. But no, we got to change it. We can't let that be natural. We can't let that be what it is. So we got to start putting in activator and jerry curls and changing things up so people change how they look. And we look at it like, oh, that's just fashion. Fashion changes with the time. Sure it does. But what happened in the 80s after we got rid of wearing our hair as it actually was? I'm just talking about the men. I ain't even got to the women yet.
Mm-hmm.
The men cut all that off. Well, they cut all that off, and they went to the fades and kind of revisited what they were doing in the 60s. But then you see the 90s set in, everybody's rocking the Caesar.
Mm-hmm.
And the ones that are growing, I'm sorry.
No, I was just reiterating what you said, a Caesar.
Yeah. The Kaiseros. The Kaisar. Right? The Caesar. You cut your hair down because you don't want to be caught growing it unless now you do like they do out in California and start growing it out, perming it and braiding it up, So, we go through these phases of our culture, but they never really want us to grow our hair and handle our hair the way we actually did before. How many people knew? Because we talk about, you grow up, you use hair grease in your hair. Your mama used hair grease when she was doing your hair, right? Where'd that grease come from? Who were the people that used grease in their hair? Or bear fat? Or duck fat? What was this stuff 100 years ago, 200 years ago? Mm-hmm. What was this hair grease we were using to help keep our hair in place and styled like we wanted it? Who were these people and you go back to the 1800s and further back, who were these people that had these pictures of this shiny, healthy hair that used bear fat and grease? Who were those people? Back then, those people were considered Indians.
Reclassified as Negro and colored.
Right. When is an Indian not an Indian? When he becomes a Negro or mulatto.
Mm-hmm. And that's like, I'm glad you even mentioned the term mulatto, because you have to take the eye test off of that once you understand in the context of history at this time what they considered a mulatto. You could be from two different tribes and that child can be considered a mulatto. You can have particular features and they would label you a mulatto.
Right. I mean, the term mulatto is very similar to mule. How you make a mule? You take two equine animals,
On
not quite the same, mix
Mm-hmm.
them in, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's all it takes is you can mix two tribes together, even though they're, ethnically seen as the same thing. They may call themselves two different things, but now you got a mulatto. You take a Cherokee, you take I don't know, you take a Meherrin Indian. Both speak the same language or similar version of the same language, but that's a mulatto, technically, because they mix between two nations. And how much of that was going on too? I meant to bring that up after I got back from India. How much of this stuff was going on? Because I was reading about the infrastructure of India versus the infrastructure of the Americas and how they were treated differently during the colonial period. The colonial period, you got to understand, didn't end that long ago in India. There was still British rule in much of India not that long ago. There are people that still alive that remember it, right?
Yep.
So look, what was the difference between the infrastructure of the two? Why did the British have such a hold on power and commerce in India when here it, at least on a visible level, ended, hundreds of years ago? Yet somehow we've been more quote unquote westernized than India has. What's the difference? And why are they different? Well, and I'll tell you one thing. In India, there wasn't a slave trade like one which existed here amongst indigenous people. And that's a taboo subject. A very taboo subject. But you have records. If you look back in the history, you can go to archive.gov. I think it's archive.gov. Among other places. There are a few places you can find this kind of stuff, but you can find records of, let's say, Florida Indians in what's now Florida. That would at one point be considered Seminoles.
Mm-hmm.
Or Gullah Geechee people, or even Chata if you go a little further west, right? How do you have some of those people, records of some of those people showing up in Ohio? In what's obviously, Midwest and Plain Indian land. How were these people traveling? Like, it wasn't just tribes moving. Tribes warred with other tribes. And prisoners of war were taken. And they were assimilated. But see, in the cultures, in the indigenous cultures, those people blended in with the tribe. So think about that concept of how a group fights another group, takes prisoners of war, and assimilates them, brings them into their own tribe. So now do you see what the colonies were beginning to understand about the indigenous people? The infrastructure was already here. Like everything else, they just laid their stuff on top of it. This is your slave trade. This is why these Indian wars were fought.
I'm glad you said that, because that's a major piece a lot of people look over, is that the reason it was easy because tribes were doing that way before the colonizers set doors. If you know the story of the Haudenosaunee, they came about from 5 separate tribes that came together that had a peace treaty among themselves.
Come on with it.
Which was, they made a peace treaty among themselves. Then later on, the Tuscarora joined them being the 6th. So it shows that these things were going on way before colonization. That tribes were going into other areas and assimilating other tribes. Remember, they studied our ancestors for 200 years, watched them, learned the system, just then place their names and narratives on top of it. That's why it was easy when you look at it, because it was already a part of you. Look at the things that they use to distract you today. It's things that's already naturally a part of you.
Big fact.
They know there's no such thing as this fairy tale thing of everybody getting along. They know this.
Yep.
That's why they place certain people in particular areas. Like we also read, a lot of cases, they didn't move nobody. They just renamed the area where your ancestors was living 3-4 times.
That's a fact.
Don't I know it?
And then the whole slave narrative story, we're not saying that there weren't slaves, but the way they try to tell you the story, there's too many holes in it. That as you sit back and you read history, not as separate events, but realize it's multiple events that's going on at the same time. Once you start looking at it like that, you start seeing the major holes that's in it. Because during all this fighting and all this warring, not just here around the world, who has time to be building ships to be dropping off some people somewhere? To a landmass that you already fighting the indigenous people. And not to mention again, there's a letter from King Fernando to the Barbados at the time, telling them the 73 Africans that they did drop off there, don't bring nobody else, because when you bring them, they're able to blend in with the mountains.
If you got all these folks that look similar enough to blend in, you got to figure out certain ways to separate them. So you got to go off of small phenotypical things like hair grade, like skin color, eye color, things like that.
Has anybody ever asked themselves, these Buffalo soldiers supposed to be of African descent? And if you look at the timeline, recent African descent, if you want to take on that narrative. So can somebody explain to me how name one of these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Buffalo soldiers speak not one African dialect, but they can speak Indian languages to talk to the Indians? Multiple.
They ain't even secretly talking to each other in the African language.
Now think about it. They wasn't going to school. They couldn't read. They couldn't write, but they speak multiple Indian dialects, but not one African.
That's kind of weird to be doing all this history and reading all this history and not hear anything about African dialect or a tribe dialect from Africa, just something, anything, some recollection.
And just think, even when you read a lot of these stories, the term African American is only implied in the revised editions of these writings.
Mm-hmm.
It don't say nothing about no Africa.
Yeah, what kind of writers are these anyway that you can't put that in the context from back in the day? You should want to put that kind of stuff in there. Well, this is what they were calling it. I'm talking about the 1800s.
Well, remember this as well. They're taking a census. So now if they take Negro off of the census, a lot of people be like, what does that mean? Let's put that in actual context real quick. You just erase generations of our ancestors. When we know
With
that they
one
said,
stroke of a pen.
yeah, one stroke of a pen. When we know at this point, there's no if and buts about it, that Indians were reclassified as colored and Negro. This is a fact, undebatable. So now, if you erase the whole term to where it's no longer used, where's the connection between the colored, the Negro, the Black, the so-called African American in 2019 back to his Indian roots?
You know, I'm glad you brought that up as well. I would challenge any linguist to refute the similarities between the so-called Negro or African American in the South, the dialect that many speak in the Deep South, and the dialects of Iroquoian, of the Iroquois speaking people, and the other people like in the Mid-Atlantic and the Southern tribes in the Southeast and the South Central United States. I would challenge any linguist to refute any similarity between how these people speak. I started studying a little bit of the Iroquois language as well, namely the Tuscarora dialect of the Iroquois language. And I found that once you start to make sense of how certain words sound, you begin to see approximations in our own dialects that we speak now. This also shows you the influence that these tribes had on English, because how is it that so many people came here and all of a sudden spoke a different form of English? Well, you got American English, or business English as they call it in modern times, and British English. How did that change? How are there so many words in American English that don't exist in British English, or are different words completely in British English? A lot of words that started here that were spoken by some of the Algonquins in the Northeast, or the Iroquois in the Mid-Atlantic and so forth. So, I mean, the way they use the way they enunciate certain sounds, like the word for hello in Scadura, in the Tuscarora language, is twang, right? Now, spelled out, it looks like twain. They don't call it that. They don't pronounce it like that. It's twang, right? How many words can you think of where you have a soft enough N at the end of a word that it isn't really pronounced?
But think about it, Carper. You just mentioned it about the dialects in the South. You know, in the South, people use that word still. You know, we talk that twang.
Right, twang. And we don't pronounce the NG on it. It's twang.
Yeah, we talk that twang.
Right.
Twang.
This is leftover. This is a remnant of the Iroquois, Siouan, and Algonquin languages that is still imprinted on American English. People in London, for instance, don't speak that way. And those that do, right. And even those that do were brought there from other places. So think about that. When you see our brothers and sisters that are there in the UK talking about the same stuff, Look, they'll tell you some of the differences that they brought with them, that their ancestors brought with them uh, to the British Isles. If you dig enough, you will find this type of stuff. People don't talk about it because we speak the way we speak, and we never think about where that means of speaking came from, where these dialects came from. We attribute it to, oh well, it's Ebonics, so it came from Africa because ebony, black, and blacks came from Africa, right?
But not one person on there on that continent naturally speak the slang that we speak. Just to add on what you were saying real quick,
Yep.
Isn't it amazing how you can have hoods on the East Coast that have no contact with hoods on the West Coast, but we speak the same urban slang
Mm-hmm.
because it's in us.
Right. Some pronunciations may be different. It happens in geographical differences, but we can all understand each other. You have people come from West Africa, where many of our people are supposed to have been from, and it's much more difficult to match those languages. Why is that?
It's just like our sister LJ Free say all the time. Isn't it amazing how we don't need to even use words to communicate with each other? We can spot each other from across the street, and a particular look ahead nod, we know exactly what we mean.
Yep. And that's a good point. And another thing that goes into the form of communication is nonverbal communication, body language. Okay. So gestures. For instance, when you go to India, part of how you greet people in Hindi, you say namaste. And whenever you see people say namaste, you see them making a gesture, almost it looks like in the West, looks like a prayer gesture.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, hand symbols are called mudras in India. And so they have certain mudras that convey a certain idea or a certain opinion about things or certain perspective. So you're saying things with your hands. That's why when you're speaking to people, your hand gesture is important. You use a certain gesture in India, it may be offensive in Spain or Italy. Or it might mean something completely unrelated in Japan. Right? So the gestures that we use aren't just ones that were brought over here from Europe, but they're a remnant of the peoples that were already here. And between the language, the spoken language, and body language, those are other clues that you find. And I mean, we could talk all day about about other cultural things that we still do, the ball games we still play. What ball games were being played in Africa before any colonization? It's well documented, the types of ball games that were being played in the Americas. What's the most global
today?
Right? What's the most global ball game on the planet? Football, or as we call it in America, soccer. That sport has spread all around the world. Where did it come from? It came from the Americas.
Mm-hmm.
Ball games. They brought some of these ball games back with them to Europe. And they made other ball games off of those.
Turned it into paid for entertainment over time.
Mm-hmm. Right? I mean, I went to India, halfway across the world, playing cricket, ball game. But when you go back, to the colonial and pre-colonial period, the people that were most renowned for playing these kinds of sports and ball games were found here in the Americas. Not that other people didn't do this kind of stuff, but this is the most well documented, and the people that were indigenous here were all written about by the Jesuits and by the other colonies as being very good, very athletic, and very skilled at ball games. You fast forward generations and look at the people who are still the most skilled at these ball games. And you start to see a few of them do the genealogy and realize, wait a minute, they are what they always were. Guys that play ball. Fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Ridiculous.
That note, we'll end today and pick back up tomorrow. Any closing remarks?
Man, appreciate you, Copper, coming through. Appreciate everybody else coming through. And I know since we're here on this so-called holiday that we will be here tomorrow on the non-holiday. So y'all
Absolutely.
have a great grand rising the rest of your day.
Yeah, I appreciate y'all. And if I could just say one more quick word. Thank you all for letting me come on for this holiday edition. And I appreciate being able to not only talk about this kind of stuff, but to give a little bit of attention to our relatives that have gone around the world and have learned and have fought and have died for us. And as cheesy as that might sound, it's a thing. It is legitimate because we all have people in our family that have gone and done that at some point. These people should be honored, not just on Memorial Day or the 4th of July or whatever have you. I don't get into all these holidays that are pushed on people, but I do think that the sentiment and the reflection and the remembrance of these people is just. So thank you all for giving me the opportunity to talk about this and about what this means to our people.
No problem. We appreciate when you can come in and speak. You always got a key. And who knows? We might come back with a special evening edition. Who knows? But on that
All
note,
right.
like we say, it's always cool when we get together with the relatives in the rising. No other place that we'd rather be. We're glad that you caught that cab and joined us. And on that note, have a blessed day and peace.
Peace.
Peace, y'all.